It's 4:02 p.m. We will get started with this. I'll call the meeting to order. Before moving on to our agenda items, I want to kind of explain how we're going to do the meeting. Because of the way we're set up with the app, the calling for a vote is going to be a little difficult. So I'm actually going to call for a roll call. So when we have a motion and a second, I will call each one of your names and you can answer yes or no. Does that sound okay?
Yeah.
Everybody okay with that? Okay. Our first item of the business is to review the minutes from our last meeting. It was emailed to you previously. I'll give you a minute to look it over and I will entertain a motion.
So moved.
There's a typo in it, and I think it needs to be adjusted. In under number 4, towards on the end of the page, it says Jennifer Klingenberg stated that they had not idea. That should be they had no idea.
All right. Thank you. We will make note of that. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. So we have a motion to approve the minutes with the one correction. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay. All right. We'll do a roll call. All in favor? Sarah?
Yes.
Mary Ann?
Yes.
Rhonda?
Yeah.
Olivia?
Yes.
Okay. Obviously no opposition because everybody voted in favor. We'll move on to the next item. It was noticed, Elena reviewed our past minutes. We have never elected a vice chair of this group, and it's been since 2016. So it'd be a good time to do that. I will make I'll entertain a motion from someone to nominate a chair from our group.
Are we going for a chair or vice chair?
I'm sorry, vice chair.
Okay,
Vice
thank
chair.
you, Ed.
Would anybody be willing to serve as vice chair?
I will.
Okay. So do we have a motion?
So moved. I can make a motion that Mary Ann Bentley be chair.
Okay. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay. I'll go down the roll call. Sarah?
Yes.
Mary Ann?
Yes.
Rhonda?
Yes.
And Olivia?
Yes.
Okay. So we have a unanimous vote on that. So we now have a vice chair. The Honorable Jeff Davis is with us today, and he's going to introduce the duties and the powers of the Zoning Board of Adjustments. Jeff, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I tell you, you were pushing the envelope there about any kind of honorable on my end, but I do appreciate very much to have the opportunity to visit with you briefly today, and it might be something that we would want to address further in additional meetings. I certainly don't want to dominate this meeting. I know that you have a public hearing and a matter to address, and I don't want to delay that. But I did want to touch base just briefly on a few matters, remind you of a few matters concerning some of your powers, some of your duties, some general things about how you go about conducting your meetings in general. Just briefly as a starter, and please don't hesitate to interrupt or ask any questions as I prattle along. But you as the entity, as the Board of Adjustments, Zoning Board of Adjustments, you're a little bit different creature than we see with many of the other boards involved with the city. They're all wonderful. They all perform tremendous good for our citizens. But you're a little bit different. You're referred to in what's known as your quasi-judicial. How do you like that one? In nature. So the things and the actions that you do, and whether you're reviewing an appeal from the city planner's decision or a variance to code provisions, those things under other boards or committees, generally it would be a suggestion, and then that goes to city council for consideration and ultimate decision. Yours is a little bit different. It kind of can jump over into the traditional court system. And so your powers and your duties are somewhat different and unique with what you're charged with because of that. And I'll say in general, the city of Nacogdoches, and it's been a pleasure to serve as counsel for the city, but it's also been very pleasing to see how open the city is and how seriously the city and the city council and city management takes with regard to open government. And with that in mind, there are a number of committees and boards under the city's umbrella that under what's known as the Open Meetings Act may not absolutely have to conduct their meetings in accordance with the Open Meetings Act. However, the city suggests, and those committees do, they do operate under the act. If the city was not so inclined to put these measures on other boards and commissions, there's no wiggle room with y'all. Your meetings are to be conducted pursuant to the Open Meetings Act, which is, if you can't sleep tonight, go read Chapter 551 of the Texas Government Code. That'll help you get to sleep. But you know that you have to operate under that framework, and you do for notice provisions and such. And so y'all follow that, and that's just something you have to do. Also, I'd like to touch just very briefly, if I can, on a little bit about how you conduct your business. So often you hear about Robert's Rules of Order and that we conduct a meeting or somebody conducts their meeting in accordance with Robert's Rules. And I'll tell you, there are not many outfits that actually do. And there's a reason for that. To absolutely adopt that and go under that structure, there's a whole rule book on that with all sorts of procedures, and it's very complicated. Matter of fact, to the point that I'm not aware of any city council or really any entity, county commissioner's court that adopts that and goes solely by that because of all the procedural maneuvering where you might block a matter going through, and you almost get to a point where you need a parliamentarian. With that said, though, the general framework is followed, and so as you've done with the approval of the minutes a minute ago, generally the order and what's needed to be done is you call the issue, you ask for it's like Chairman Pulley did for a motion to approve the minutes or whatever the issue, the agenda item might be. And somebody would make a motion to take a certain action or adopt a certain whatever, or grant a variance or deny, whatever it might be. Then somebody has to second that. Well, after that's been seconded, then the rule of thumb is then you open it up for discussion. Now, oftentimes the reality of it is your board has already discussed the matter, but after a first and a second, then you ask, is there any discussion? And if there is, you have it. If not, well, you don't, and then you take a vote. Now, when it comes to matters of your powers on things such as an appeal of a decision or somebody requests a variance, y'all are a little different also. It is not a simple majority rule. So whenever y'all take a vote, whenever you take action, you actually need a super majority. And I believe there's actually in the local government code, it may be under chapter 211, I'm sorry, I don't have it right in front of me, that addresses some of what you do and don't do and how you do it. And so you have to have, I believe it's 75%, Elena. I was just seeing if you were paying
Yes, you're correct
attention.
at 75%.
So it's 75%. So if you do lawyer math on this thing, that means that since there's what, I guess, how many members do we have? We got 5. And
5.
so you have to have 4 instead of 3. So there are some situations where city council in certain areas has to have a supermajority, but y'all, that's what you have to have. So that means that you have to have 4 of the 5 approving whatever the motion in the second is, if that makes any sense. Are there any questions to this point? I take it by your silence, there are none. Okay. So those are a couple of important things to keep in mind. I do want to talk just a little bit about your powers. I don't want to, get too far off in the weeds, and we can certainly take that up at a future meeting if need be. I know you're aware of them, but I'd just like to briefly run over them. Those are found, if we look in our Code of Ordinances, Nacogdoches City Code of Ordinances under Chapter 118, and we get to Section 118-99, it talks about that you have the powers to decide appeals of the city planner's decision. And so what that means is that the Board of Adjustments, y'all shall have the power to hear and decide appeals where it is alleged there's an error in any order, requirement, decision, or determination made by the city planner in the enforcement of this chapter, and that would be this chapter on zoning and city rules and regulations. So somebody could make an appeal from a decision from Elena's office, or it could be a variance to the actual, seeking a variance to the actual zoning chapter itself. So when you make a finding, when it comes to a request for a variance, under your powers, there's certain things that you're to look at and that your findings are to be based upon. And really, I think there's 6. Elena, isn't that correct? Very good. And I'm going to just...
Yes, correct. Sorry, I was muted. Yes, that is correct. There are 6.
Oh, okay. And so I'm just going to briefly go through those. Number 1 is that such variance is in harmony with the intent and purpose of the comprehensive plan in this chapter. So it has to be in harmony with both the comprehensive plan and the overall zoning chapter. Number 2, any variance will not substantially or permanently injure the appropriate use of adjacent property in the same district. So that's something you look at, is adjacent properties and the effect of that. Number 3, that the variance will not adversely affect the health, safety, and general welfare of the public. It's often referred to as police power of a municipality. So it won't adversely affect those things. Number 4, that the variance will not authorize the operation or use other than those uses specifically authorized for the district in which the property for which the variance is sought is located. Number 5, that the plot of the owner, so you look at the situation of the owner of the property for which the variance is sought, is due to unique circumstances existing on the property, including but not limited to the area, shape, or slope, and that the unique circumstances weren't created by the owner of the property. So that's kind of an interesting yet very important, and I think sometimes kind of a subtle thing that can be easily missed, that it's not, the circumstance is not created by the owner of the property and are not merely financial and are not due to or the result of general conditions in the district in which the property is located. And the last one, number 6, is that the variance is not a self-created hardship. So this is something that the owner of the property is not created, not a self-created hardship. So those are the areas that you're to look to and to make your findings on. So that's the framework that you're to use as you go through the process. I guess lastly, I'd like to talk just a little bit about the public hearing itself in general. And it's very important how we go about it. and that we make sure we afford folks due process, the opportunity to present their situation, and I guess you could say, in legal term, kind of their case, and how you go about that. And so generally, when we conduct a public hearing, we make the announcement, Mr. Chairman, that you're now opening the public hearing. So everybody knows, has the opportunity to be aware of what's going on. There can be, Elena can certainly have a portion of that, participate in that. Generally, the person seeking the variance then goes next is the presentation that they make. You can have then testimony. You can actually have testimony. So we kind of get to that quasi-judicial portion, testimony by the parties supporting the application. So that could, or the variance, or the challenge. So they actually have the ability to provide testimony. If there's somebody in opposition on the other side, you grant them that same, you afford them that same opportunity. Then you can have rebuttal. It's just kind of like a court case. If I was back in my prosecution days, if I was prosecuting a case, the state puts on its case, the defense puts on its case, the state has the opportunity for rebuttal on that. And then so after you've gone through those processes and you've afforded everybody the due process and the opportunity to present their position, then you officially close the public hearing. And so it's important that we go through essentially those steps. Now there are, Mr. Chairman, you have some latitude in there as long as at the end of the day you afford parties the opportunity to present their position. But you go through those steps and then you officially close it before then taking up your discussions, whether you're going to grant the variance or how you're going to go about it. And then we get back into the motion and the second and the discussion and then the supermajority vote. So I know that's kind of a 30,000 foot view, and I know I covered a lot of area and maybe not such a short time. But I did want to kind of give an overview of that framework. And if you have any questions, I'll certainly try to address them. I know Elena, I'm a sorry substitute for Elena, but we'll work through that. And if you feel it'd be beneficial on some area to drill down a little bit deeper at a future meeting, we can certainly do that.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. As always, very clear. Any questions of Jeff before he leaves us? Wow, you were thorough.
Well, I'm going to say this. I guess I'd close with this: is that I really sincerely appreciate you all bring tremendous skill set. I know we trespass on your time when we ask you to do this. I know you get paid a big whopping nothing to do this, but it is a very important function. It's set out not just in our code, but it's addressed in state law. And your decisions really are quasi-judicial. You're probably the most unique board, I would say, Elaine. I don't know if you agree with that, but probably, if not one of the most unique boards in city government.
I would agree.
Jeff, thank you for your input. Definitely appreciate it.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, now we'll move on to the public hearing. This is to consider a variance to the zoning ordinance section 118-464-4 to reduce the required parking setback on Johnson Street for Lot 2, City Block 56 of the Go-Jacks #1 subdivision. The request is submitted by George Barham, who is with us. Lena, will you introduce the item for us?
Sure, thank you. Can everybody see my PowerPoint presentation?
Yes.
Okay, all right. So thank you, Chair. Tonight's request is to consider a variance to the parking setback for property located along Johnson Street from 20 feet to 7 feet. This property is currently under construction and it's being constructed as a single-family home. This is a request from the literal enforcement of the zoning ordinance. The ZBA rules and procedures state that this type of variance may be requested whenever, owing to exceptional and extraordinary conditions, the literal enforcement of the provisions of the zoning regulations will result in unnecessary hardship and the development of the property. So the subject property is situated in the Go-Jacks No. 1 subdivision, and the lot meets all of the dimensional requirements of the subdivision and zoning ordinance. The site is relatively flat with about a 3-foot slope from the rear of the property to Johnson Street, and there is no FEMA regulated floodplain or any unusual topographic features that exist on the property. The property is surrounded by single-family development to the north, east, and west, and property to the south is vacant, but is planned for additional single-family homes. The subject property is zoned R3 2-family. The purpose of this zoning classification is to create a residential district which is appropriate for both single-family and duplex housing. The zoning ordinance states that no required off-street parking space shall be located in the required front yard in any residential or agricultural zoning district. This requirement applies to properties that are zoned A, agricultural, R1 single family, R2 single family, and R3 2-family. You'll note that this requirement does not apply to R4 multifamily development. The required setbacks for the subject property are as follows. The front setback from the right-of-way of Johnson Street is 20 feet. The required side setback on both the north and south sides of the property are 6 feet. And the required rear setback on the western property line is 10 feet. The zoning ordinance also requires at a minimum 2 off-street parking spaces per dwelling unit. So in this instance, it's a single-family home, and so the developer would be required to provide at least 2 off-street parking spaces that met all the dimensional requirements of the zoning ordinance. On your screen, you'll see a copy of the site plan exhibit that was submitted by the applicant, and this is part of the variance request. The lot 2 that you're looking at is approximately 55 feet wide and 160 feet deep, which equals a total of 8,800 square feet. This is well within the dimensional requirements for single-family lots in this zoning district. The structure itself is a 3-bedroom, 3-bath home consisting of approximately 1,300 square feet. And you see they have illustrated where the existing structure is today, and then the driveway and parking area has not been completed yet, but that is the proposed location that they're showing on the exhibit that's been submitted. Residential building permit was issued for this property earlier this year. As I said, it is under construction. The permit was approved with the condition that the required off-street parking, as I noted earlier, would meet the 20-foot setback requirement, and these were acknowledged by the applicant as a condition for approval. Like I said before, the single-family home is now constructed, and the applicant is seeking a variance to that 20-foot setback for the parking. For head-end parking, each parking space must be at least 9 feet wide by 19 feet deep. And so staff outlined the parking area in red that would meet the minimum dimensional requirements for the 2 off-street parking spaces. So you'll see the red box, and then that parking area is located approximately 7 feet from the property line along Johnson Street. As a reminder, I know that Mr. Davis went over these earlier. These are the conditions for approval that the Zoning Board of Adjustment must review when considering the request. I'm not going to go over each one. I just wanted to have them for reference. Staff has reviewed the variance application against these criteria and provided for the following findings. These are outlined in your staff report, but I'm going to go over staff's findings just briefly. The purpose of the development standards in general in the zoning ordinance are to enhance the view and image of the community, contribute to the overall quality and visual appearance of developments, provide for both visual relief and open space within urbanized developments, and to safeguard enhance property values and to protect a public and private investment. Staff finds that the proposed setback variance of 7 feet instead of the required 20 is a substantial deviation from the stipulations outlined in the zoning ordinance, and therefore finds that the request is not in harmony with the intent and purpose of the comprehensive plan and zoning ordinance. Staff does find that granting the variance would not affect the use of the adjacent property, that the location and the design of the proposed parking, however, would be inconsistent with that of some of the other single-family homes in the area. Staff also does not find that granting the variance will adversely affect the health and safety of the general welfare or public, nor would it authorize a use other than the current use of the property as a single-family structure. However, staff does find that there are no unique circumstances existing on the property, and there are no unique circumstances that have been identified by the applicant. And lastly, there are no existing hardships related to the subject property. Part of staff's review of the proposed variance is to identify any possible alternatives to the proposed project or proposed site plan that would comply with current standards. The applicant has communicated that while the zoning ordinance only requires 2 off-street parking spaces, the desire is to provide 3 that are unobstructed. Whenever we look at the site layout and look at the area of the lot, staff has identified a couple of alternative options that would accommodate the 3 off-street parking spaces that would allow for vehicles to back in and out without blocking each other. The first one that you see is alternative option A. So this is highlighted in blue, and this has just been overlaid with the site plan that the applicant submitted. This is to scale, and this would provide for 3 unobstructed parking spaces that met the 20-foot setback requirement. The other is alternative B. Again, this is just an example of how the parking area could be laid out to meet the standards. This would provide parking, not head-in parking, but you would pull in and then park to the south side of the lot. Another option is to simply extend the parking area another 14 feet to accommodate that 20 feet of paved area outside the setback. But that option would actually increase the pavement area and essentially create a commercial-like parking lot for a single-family home in a single-family area. So staff, in conclusion, does recommend, based on the findings outlined in the staff report and in the presentation, that there's no special conditions affecting the property and there's no identified hardships, and therefore staff does recommend denial. We did send out 17 notices to property owners within the 200-foot notification area, and we received 2 contacts in opposition. One of those we received in writing, and we did share that with the zoning board earlier today. The resident was did want to attend the meeting, but had a scheduling conflict, and so wanted us to share that with you, and you have that available. The other was a phone call. Both of them just cited general concerns about the potential for student renters and parking issues and general concerns with the development and development practices. So that concludes staff's presentation. I know that the applicant is in attendance and would like to address the Zoning Board of Adjustment.
George, would you like to speak?
There I go. I was getting off the mute. Okay. I really appreciate everybody's time and effort in coming to this meeting. I really do appreciate it. My name is George Barham. I'm a local broker of real estate, developer, and philanthropist in this community. My desire is to continue to build homes in field lots that I've accumulated over 10 to 12 years. And as you know, there are not there's no new subdivisions going on in our community at all. So it's already a challenge to find available property in which to build. I've owned this land about 10 years and just now getting to the part where we're developing it. It is a unique street and area where you've got up at the top of Lynn Street, you've got multifamily coming down Lynn, and then horseshoes, curves and dead ends. Johnson does availability of 6 places to rent. Built 2 homes side by side. We're just addressing this one right now. Both of them are pre-leased. I would have to get with the office on who the people are. I know one is a sales rep out of Lufkin, is a professional gentleman. But for the past 15 years, I've built probably 20 plus homes throughout the community, most, if not all, with head parking, no garages, a garage on a rent house. It's nothing more than 4 to 5 hours of just cleaning up junk when the renter leaves. So that's why we choose not to do garages. So let's see, I'm asking for a drive variance that, in my opinion, it makes sense. Sometimes what's in an office and in writing versus what's out in the field doesn't always match up. And so it doesn't negatively impact the neighborhood, and it holds the house to a higher standard to alleviate any concerns with parking to get people off the street. And so having 3 parking places, I think is really ideal. And it's more than the 2. I'd like to, if you could, look at I guess I sent 7 pictures. I'm not as easy as Elena with the PowerPoint, but I'd like to just show you the first one on Scarborough, and I realize that's R4. It's a little different animal, but nonetheless, it's harmonious, and there's 9 houses in a row that I've built. That's just kind of a long street view of what that looks like. The second picture is just a front shot. A house there again on Scarborough. The third picture with 2 vehicles of 3 that could park there in front of 26 Beverly, and the house next door, 2100 Beverly, are both houses that we built in 2018. And those are R1. Of course, they're right next to a set of duplexes. So again, as y'all know, our town is very unique in how we even exist to have the size population we do, with the necessity of having the university. The last house that we built was on the corner of Emerald and Sabre. Again, it's already a challenge enough to build in neighborhoods that are 40, 50 years old, and here we pop up new construction. So, you know, you have an appraiser here, and she might have an opinion on why in the world I bump my head and want to build new homes in neighborhoods. Second to last picture is a yellow duplex behind Subway on Martinsville off of University. That's not a home that we did, but another developer built, and that's 55 feet wide. And finally, the last one is the last house we finished before the 2 on Johnson. Again, identical home, same footprint with that L-shaped driveway. And I took a picture of my truck in there. It's just going to create a parking issue, in my opinion. So that's where I am. I'm just a fiduciary and the builder. I do not own. I've been contacted by folks in town and out of town that would like a home for investment, and so I just feel like it's my duty to at least give them the best shot, and also doing something that we've been doing for 15, 16 years, and it's never been an issue. I'll be happy to compromise. I understand the 7 feet setback. The house is 39 feet from the curb, so I do have linear feet. We want to push the drive a little bit closer to the house, and that would give us some more room off of that 7-foot setback. Ultimately, my guys are going to show up tomorrow and pour a driveway. They'll be there at 7:30, and we'll either do it like I'm doing it, or we'll do it some other variant way if that's what the wishes of this board are. It just looks weird. It just doesn't even look harmonious to the adjacent homes in the neighborhood. This other type of drive concept. So I'm going to be here for the rest of my life building homes. Our family's been for 6 generations, and at no point do I want to be butting heads with the city staff that I've got 2 other projects in front of them that's separate from this. But again, I've been asked by the person who gave me the money to build this house to come before you. The owner of the Gojak subdivision is a Wells Fargo investment banker in Dallas, Texas, who graduated from SFA. And so that's that's where we are, and I do appreciate your consideration.
Okay, thank you, Jordan. Okay, I know we didn't have anybody signed up to speak, but I'd like to open the public meeting now and entertain any discussion from the population, the public of Nacogdoches. Since no one else is with us, I don't think that is applicable, but I'm doing that. Hearing no one is able or willing to speak, then we will close the public hearing and allow the board to ask questions of Elena or George. Anyone have a question?
I guess I have a question. Just east of that on Johnson Street is zoned general business.
Right. I mean, I guess I don't know. There's multifamily, just 2 or 3. There's businesses at the top of the street, so it is mixed use in that area.
Yeah. I will, if the board doesn't mind, let me pull up my presentation again so we can take a look at the zoning map and provide a little bit of clarification, if that's all right. All right. So this is the zoning map. The subject property is highlighted in yellow. The property, as well as property to the north, east, and south, is R3. And you're correct. Property immediately to the east across Johnson Street is zoned B2 general business. Now, when we conducted site visits, these homes that you see here, they're located on the north side of Lynn Street. Those are all developed as single family, as well as the homes that are along the east side of Johnson and then the south side of Lynn. Now this structure here, this 111, 113, 109, 107, and 105, that is developed as multifamily, but the properties immediately surrounding the subject property are developed as single family. But you are correct. The properties on the east side of Johnson Street are general commercial or general business.
Any other questions of George or Elena?
I guess I guess for me, I just think about that. I would rather know that there's 3 cars parked in a driveway than 2 in the driveway and 1 on the street. I mean, that's just my observation.
And if I could address everyone, and I don't want to get into the technicalities of this because I'm not a surveyor, but that really isn't even a city street. So it's 27 feet wide. It dead ends, and that's the Tommy Findeisen thing. So he's not available to be here. But the street being so narrow to begin with, it does lend itself for more congestion if it is that people are parking on the street.
Mm-hmm. And to address your comment about the 3 off-street parking spaces, staff has identified 3 alternatives that would provide for 3 unobstructed parking spaces to be provided on the site that still met the setback. The first is simply adding additional pavement all the way, to the house that would allow a paved area that would be 19 feet wide, that could accommodate the parking spaces in that area, be 20 feet from the front property line. The other 2 alternatives were the ones that we presented during the presentation that have a narrower driveway off of Johnson Street, but still allow vehicles to pull fully onto the property, park, and then back out without blocking each other in. And if you like, I can pull those exhibits back up into my presentation. We can do that now. And
yes, please.
I will do it now. Okay, so this is the site plan that was submitted by the applicant. The area highlighted in red is the area that staff dimensioned, just showing you the minimum required off-street parking spaces. If you take that pavement where they're showing the driveway and simply extend it to the face of the building, well, then you have an area that provides 3 off-street parking spaces and meets the minimum setback requirement because you have 40 feet, 20 feet of that is setback, and 19 feet of that is the minimum depth of the head-end parking space. We also provided a couple of other alternatives. The first one shows 3 off-street parking spaces. So this actually provides a 27-foot wide parking area here, which would allow 3 side-by-side parking spaces. And the drive aisle shown could accommodate the backing maneuvers of all 3 of those individual parking spaces without building a driveway across the entire width of the parking lot, and still allowing those parking spaces to be located 20 foot back from the property line. The other one is, again, just a very simple layout. Instead of pulling straight in and parking in front of the house, you would pull in and then turn south. And so the parking area would be perpendicular to the street. But again, these provide 3 unobstructed parking spaces and allow backing maneuvers. And additionally, I'll note that the zoning ordinance doesn't prohibit cars from stacking in residential driveways. So oftentimes you'll have a single family driveway that has a garage and then a driveway in front. You may have 2 cars in the garage and 2 cars stacking in the driveway. And that's permitted by the city because you may have a large household that has multiple drivers. But these are, again, 3 different alternatives that would allow the applicant to do what it is that they're pursuing as far as providing those 3 different unobstructed parking spaces and still meet the minimum dimensional requirements of the zoning ordinance.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, not hearing any additional questions or comments from the board. I will entertain a motion.
What would you like the motion to include?
Well, that's open to the board. We can have a motion to approve or deny the request. We can have a motion to amend the request based on the other options. Kind of wide open at this point.
Ed, if I may, I think you're right. The board could move forward with a motion to approve the variance as presented by the applicant. The board could make a motion to deny the variance as presented, or I think, and Jeff, correct me if I'm wrong, you could make a motion to approve. Well, and actually you wouldn't be approving a variance because the alternatives that were presented satisfy. Now, I think maybe you could make a motion to approve with the condition that they shift the parking further into the property or something to that effect, other than what they're showing on the exhibit that's been proposed. But that's, again, that's at the leisure of the board. Is that correct, Jeff? Does that sound right?
Yeah, generally, yes, I think so. So somebody, if they were so inclined, could make a motion to approve the variance and a finding that it satisfies all those criteria. If somebody was so inclined, they could make a motion to deny the variance because it doesn't satisfy all the criteria. I think if you are silent and nobody makes a motion, then it would fail for lack of action. With regard to Elena, let me just for clarification, maybe for the board's clarification, with regard to the alternatives that you just explained and displayed, would those actually require a variance, or if those were made, would that satisfy present code.
It would satisfy the current code.
So if they satisfy the code, then those changes would not require a variance, I believe. Would that be correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
I have a question. George, I have a question. George, what was your plan for the 14 feet between the house and your proposed driveway? Is that going to be a yard?
Right, that was gonna be landscaped and be a yard, and if not, we pour it all the way up to the house. I guess having people park that close to the home. I mean, I might
Okay,
maybe split the difference or something, maybe come back, you know,
that's what I was wondering.
12
If you
12
came,
feet.
if you came up another 7 feet and just had about 7 foot from the house, would that satisfy the setback?
You'd be about 6 feet short of the setback, but that would be palatable for us to do that.
George, may I ask you a question, please? Have you built those homes further back? Because there's land back
Well,
there.
Yes, ma'am. And it's already back far enough to meet the off-street parking. That's why when we got the plan approved for construction, we built it as far back as we did. But yes, we could have pushed it back even further. I don't know that it would have really helped with the street parking that we're really trying to accomplish.
When you build the one on lot 3, are you going to move it further back so that this isn't happening again?
No, because I've already built on lot 1, and I'm going to keep the front of the homes harmonious to the street, just like I've done on Scarborough, less the fact the last one I had to push it back 10 feet. Houses on either side that are 10 feet closer, and it just looks weird.
Yeah.
Yeah, Lena, correct me if I'm wrong, but from what I'm understanding, we could entertain a motion to accept the request. We could entertain a motion to deny the request, or we can make a motion to amend the request. Like Rhonda was mentioning, we give them a 14-foot setback instead of a 7. Is that correct?
I believe that is. Now, whenever you make your motion, you want to make sure that you tie it back to that criteria. So whether it's a motion for approval or denial, you want to outline the reasons why it satisfies the criteria. And you can simply say, we recommend approval because the request meets all of the criteria as outlined by staff. We recommend denial because the request does not meet all the criteria as outlined by staff. Or like you said, you could move forward with a condition of approval that the applicant shift the parking area however many feet it is into the property in order to, satisfy the criteria. And you can identify specific elements if you like.
Does anybody have any questions about a motion, how that should be made?
I guess I would, George, if you just left 3 feet from the beginning, from the front of the dwelling, that would be enough for like a flower bed, like a 3-foot flower bed. Correct?
That's correct.
So if you did 3 feet and you just moved that driveway up another 11 feet, that would get you get it off the road a little bit more, the vehicles.
That's correct.
I just know from rental properties, all of us know a lot of times they're not real into yard work as it is. So, it could be that if you just had a flower bed, I can understand for aesthetic. You don't want to just have concrete up next to a concrete house or a brick house. I understand that. So if you just had about a 3-foot flower bed and brought that driveway up 11 feet, I guess what does the board think of that?
That's more palatable to what, but the options that the staff presented, there were 3 options, they weren't unpalatable either.
Correct. Yeah. The options, remember the first option looked the most aesthetically pleasing. I didn't care for the one that looked like a commercial deal where you parked in and then backed up.
Yeah.
The first option that Elena, that's just my opinion.
Yes, and the first option actually allows for a much larger lawn area. So it takes up less than 50% of that front yard. So it would allow for much more green space, much more opportunities for landscaping, things of that nature.
Is the first,
And I don't
option
I don't
A?
disagree.
Is that what we're talking about?
What did George say?
Yes. Let me.
I'm sorry, guys. I don't disagree with that. I just would prefer not to park or pour all the way up to the front porch.
Would you show us the first option, please, Elena?
Yes,
I'm
ma'am.
sorry.
No, you're fine. So this is option A. So you can see the black and white diagram is what's been presented by staff. The outline in blue is what would be pavement based on the alternative that staff has outlined. So you can see, I mean, it's almost the same amount of concrete than what's being proposed. It's actually a little bit less, and it allows for a much larger lawn and yard area. The same thing with the second option. It's very similar. You know, it has more of the L-shaped driveway versus head end, but again, it's almost the same amount of concrete that's being proposed, but allows for a much larger green space and open yard. If you were to take that driveway and simply extend it towards the house, then it would look more like a commercial development. And I took some photos out on site that I thought I'd present to you. The top one you see on your screen is the side view of the home in question, and I believe that's actually Mr. Barham's vehicle. The photo on the bottom is from the street. These are very similar to the properties that Mr. Barham was talking about that he built on Beverly and Scarborough, and so I wanted to present some photos of those as well to illustrate how these would look and feel. So here you have 3 paved areas. You have 3, basically the front yard is a parking lot, and it has a much more multi-family feel than it does single family. But again, I think this is very similar to what the end product would be. Now, also, I will say that these homes are built much closer to the street than I believe what's shown on Mr. Barham's plans. So, here there wasn't as much room to accommodate the off-street parking. And I'm going to exit my screen so we can go back to discussion.
So I'd like to get clarification. I guess I'd like to get clarification if you go back to the one with the red box around the proposed driveway that you said if we push that back further, then that wasn't one of the options, but it was the one prior to option A, I believe.
Well, yes.
Move that back. So I could pour what's in red and shoot it all the way back, and then that accomplishes the 2 off-street parking and not being in the setback.
Correct. Or like I said, if you wanted to do the 3, which I know is the intent, then the other ones outlined in blue would also
Right.
Typically what we see for traditional single family development is the 2 side-by-side parking spaces that are right in front of the home, and that would be the area that you see outlined in red, and the driveways are usually just the same width of the parking area. So the driveways and off-street parking takes up much less space. Or if you have a garage, your garage simply satisfies the requirements for your off-street parking when you just have a driveway. So there's some alternatives and there's some different designs and layouts out there, but this is just a couple variations.
So, I'm sorry, may I speak for a second? Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, can we look at that red diagram again, please?
Yes.
I'm sorry.
No, you're fine.
My internet went out in the middle of the meeting, so sorry about that. Thank you suddenly. Okay. So on
Olivia,
the red is the 2 parking spots that meet the city rules for 2 off-street parking spaces. And really what Mr. Barham is trying to do is add an additional off-street parking spot, get the cars off the road, really.
Yeah.
And it's the length of the concrete going down the road frontage that's a question as well. Is that correct? That's part of the issue.
No, ma'am. As far as the width of the driveway itself, our driveway standards for single family homes have some minimums and maximums. The minimum is 12 feet for a residential driveway, and the maximum is 30 feet. So what he's showing is the maximum driveway width. And what's outlined on your screen is that driveway is the parking area that he's proposing, which if you look at the red box accommodates the 2 off-street parking spaces. But again, you can see that it's only 7 feet from that back property line. Traditionally, what we'll see a more narrow driveway extended to the face of the building, and that allows for 2 side-by-side parking spaces that are at least 20 feet past the property line. Some of the alternatives that staff identified during our review that would allow Mr. Barham to build those 3 street parking spaces that he desires and have them be side by side,
Right.
pull completely off the property and then back out without having cars parked behind each other. That can be accommodated with what staff is illustrating in blue. The driveway is more narrow, but if you're just pulling in and out one at a time, you simply pull into the 3 spaces and then people can pull in and out at their leisure. This requires much less, area as far as what's left over for green and open space, but still meets the goals and objectives of the applicant. The other one is very similar. It's just it's an L-shaped driveway instead of head-in parking, but again, it's about the same amount of concrete. It meets the setback requirement and allows for 3 unobstructed off-street parking spaces. And so while the requirement is only 2, I know the applicant desires to have 3, which is fine. And staff does allow for parking to queue. When you're in a residential area, oftentimes you see cars parking behind each other in their driveways. Depending on, your clientele, of course, there's a desire for some people to want, individual spaces parking around other people, which could be achievable here, but again, doesn't meet the setback requirements. And so one of the things that we look at when we're reviewing these variance requests are, one, is there a hardship? Is there some sort of unique circumstance that applies to this property that's different from other properties in the area or other similarly situated properties? And 2, are there any alternatives that would allow the applicant to meet the requirements and still achieve their goals? And so that's what staff has done with these blue outlines.
Understood.
Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Yeah. I have a question. What is the length of if looking at it, would be the west line that goes from the top of the porch straight down? What is that length?
So the building is centered on the lot. There's just under 14 feet between the house and those northern and southern property lines.
So that line, that line is say what, 28 feet or 20 feet? It doesn't look like.
I'm sorry. Which line are you referring to?
I'm referring to the line where they would head in to park.
Oh, okay.
The far left line. Yes, how long is that line?
This one here?
No, the blue line, that right there.
Yes, so this line is 27 feet wide. For head-end parking, each parking space has to be 9 feet wide. So, 9 multiplied by 3 is 27. This would allow for exactly 3 off-street parking spaces. Now, you could make it wider. What the applicant is showing is 30 feet wide. And so you just add a couple of feet, onto that, and it gives you a little bit more maneuverability. But the minimum width is 9. And so what we illustrated just met the minimum requirements. You could make it larger. We just wanted to show how it could be developed in the code.
I guess for me, if it wasn't already across from D2, I would have an issue with it. But you already have D2 zoning to the east, and those 3 things, 213 Johnson, 18 Johnson, and 93 Johnson could all sell, and you could have a lot across the road. And there's nothing you could do with that because it backs up to commercial zoning or the general business zoning. I understand the spirit of planning department. I just look at the location of where this one is. And also, I guess I just look at trying to get things on someone building in the city limits. We just have a lot of building in our city limits anymore.
I would agree with you, Rhonda, and I think offset parking on a residential home when there's an intention to have additional residential homes there doesn't actually kind of takes away from the harmony of a neighborhood type feeling. So I think the alternative parking solutions are anti the first item that we're looking at as far as how does it work with the neighborhood and give that neighborhood feel.
Right. I mean, we're looking at zoning R3. It's not like we're in an R1 area.
Right.
We're not even in an R2 area. We're in an R3 area that joins a general business area.
Agreed. And that it's very much mimics also those 2-year-old builds on Martinsville, which I think is very apropos for the area and for the Tennessee.
I do. I would rather see them park 3 cars in a driveway that had a variant branded to it than go with the 2 car and then you got them parking on the street. And then you can't get an ambulance down there or a fire truck.
Yes, and I drove down that street just an hour and a half ago, or I drove down there at 2:25 today. And that's a narrow street, and it's definitely going to be a narrower street if there were additional homes with people parking on the street farther down. So
I guess if we're looking for a motion, I guess I would propose that let me say, I would like to see some more concrete, like within about 3 to 4 feet of the residents, so that they're not right on street with the back end of their cars. So I guess if you just said if we kept the original design, but move the concrete up within 3 to 4 feet of the residents. I don't know. What's the thoughts of that?
So what's that going to make it then? How many feet from the, we're now 7 feet, so what are we going to have?
10.
We would have, well, actually, if you moved it another 10 feet up, you would be within, that would make it, what would that make it then? If we moved it 10 foot up and left 4 feet, your driveway then would be 26 plus 10. It would be 36. And what is is 20 foot setback? We would be at a 16 foot setback. Is that correct on the math?
Hold on one moment. Let me pull up the exhibit.
It's already 26 feet wide. If we add another 10 feet to get it within 4 feet of the dwelling, that would be 36 feet. And 20 foot is the variance. So we would only be 16 foot. We'd only be looking at a 4 foot variance.
Yes, it would be if you shifted the parking pad 10 feet into the property line, then that would allow, you know, a 19-foot parking stall with a 16-foot setback from the property line.
It's more common.
So you're correct. It would be a 4-foot variance.
So we'd be looking at a 4-foot variance.
Okay.
Is that a motion, Rhonda?
I'll make that a motion that make a motion that we grant a 4-foot variance and increase concrete feet another 10.
Repeat the motion, Ed, because she's cutting out.
Rhonda is making a motion that we amend the setback, the variance to 4 feet instead of the requested 13 feet. Is that right, Elena?
I believe that's correct.
That's correct.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Discussion.
How is that different from either option A or B?
Option A or B wouldn't require a variance because it complies with the current code.
Okay.
But this gets us parking in front of the house instead of offset.
That's my understanding as well.
Okay, but then you're going to still build another house down there, so we're going to be under the same situation.
I've talked to city staff about that and I agree. And that's up to them. Maybe we can look at zone change somehow. That's just over my head.
Zone.
Okay, is there any more discussion?
I would say the con to just extending his proposed driveway is there's less green space, which is that the major concern of staff? There's no green space?
Well, there's a couple of different things. I think when we look at the intent of the ordinance and just the intent of development standards in general, we're trying to create a consistent development pattern. You're trying to create a certain type of character for the single family and 2-family neighborhoods. Smaller parking areas, smaller driveways are more indicative of your more low density residential, where wide parking areas like for multifamily development have more commercial feel. And to several of the photos that the applicant presented to the board, all those properties on Scarborough Street and the property off Martinsville Road, those are all zoned for multifamily development. And they allow for single family, but setback doesn't apply because that's a more intense residential zoning district. So, there's a couple of things that come into play. One is open space, it's character, it's trying to ensure consistent development pattern. And so when we're looking at amendments to the zoning ordinance, we don't want to pursue an amendment to our zoning ordinance or amendment to development standard simply to satisfy the goals of an individual. We want to look at the city in a more holistic way. And there are several properties that have been developed to this standard recently. We actually pulled a report for all the building permits for residential in the last 3 years. Several of them were single family in multifamily zoning districts, which this requirement does apply to, which is the situation for a lot of Mr. Barham's properties. But several of them were R1 and R2 and R3, and all of those plans and driveways complied with the current standards. So, whenever we're looking at these cases, one, we're looking at, are we being consistent in our application? Are we ensuring a consistent development pattern? Are we preserving character? And I understand in this scenario, it's a little bit different because you've got B2 right across the street. But in general, the area is largely developed as single family. So all those things, I think, can consider along with the criteria that's outlined in the zoning ordinance for approval of variance, and it's at your discretion whether or not the board feels that they've satisfied that and meets the intent of the ordinance, and so forth and so on. So I hope I answered your question for that.
Yes, yes, you did. I think, in my opinion, I think that I do see the fact that we need to keep consistency. That's what we're, here to help do. But in this case might warrant an exception to that because of the narrowness of the street. That, in my opinion, is more important than the B2 across the street. But I don't know, this is a tough one.
Well, and
Are duplexes allowed in R3?
Or
Ma'am?
what?
Are duplexes allowed in R3?
Yes, yes, R3 allows for single family and duplex.
And this is zoned R3.
Yes, ma'am.
All right.
Okay,
That was my-
any more
my
discussion?
thought. But if
I guess
you
I'd
built
like
a
to-
duplex, you would have 4 parking spots.
Right. Right, which was exactly what I was going to say. So I guess my input then, discussion wise, would be to redact, and I would more so be inclined to making a motion to approve.
Approve what?
Approve Mr. Barham's proposal.
Okay, at this point, we have a motion and a second for a 4-foot variance.
Right.
Okay. And unless Rhonda wants to amend that motion, then we'll call for a roll call. Okay, Sarah?
So we're commenting on Rhonda's,
No, we're voting on Rhonda's motion for a 4-foot variance.
am I allowed to say one more thing, please?
Well, actually, no. Unfortunately. Anyway. So we have a motion and a second on the floor. Is there any more discussion? If not, we need to call for a vote. Okay, no more discussion. Sarah?
I think I'm going to vote no on Rhonda's motion to extend the concrete another 10 feet.
Okay, Marianne?
No.
Rhonda?
Yes.
Olivia?
Yes.
Okay, so we don't have a super majority. Is there another motion before the board?
I make a motion, we accept his appeal, Mr. Barham's appeal.
Okay, do we have a second?
I second.
Okay, Sarah? Oh, I'm sorry, more discussion, excuse me.
I would just like to say that I think this motion is in fit. We have R3 and we have B2 and we have a narrow road and we want 3 parking spaces in front of a home that looks nice and uniform and a newly developed area where on-street parking does pose a detriment to other homes farther down, fire trucks, police, ambulances getting through. And if you can get them off the road, get them off the road. You can give them a yard, you can make a neighborhood, work to keep it with the rest of the neighborhood, even though the rest of the neighborhood technically sounds like it's not in compliance. I think that this is a good solution.
So
Okay,
you're
so
talking about a long driveway that 3 people are going to park in? Is that what I understand?
She's saying to just go ahead and grant it the way it was presented.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, any more discussion? We have a motion and a second to grant the variance as presented. Sarah?
Yes.
Yes. Marianne?
No.
Rhonda?
Yes.
Olivia?
Yes.
Okay, we have a supermajority. Motion passes.
Ed, did you vote?
I don't vote unless it's a tiebreaker.
Well,
Jeff?
we have to have, no, sir, you do. We have to have we have to have a supermajority of 75% or more.
Okay.
So since we have 5 folks, that means 4 folks have to vote in favor of a motion.
Okay, then I vote yes. Okay, so we have it. Motion passes. The variance is granted. Okay, are there any other items to discuss? Okay. Thank you, board, for the lengthy meeting. Y'all did a great job. Jeff, thank you for your guidance. Been a few months since we've met, so your refresher was a good one. Thank you for that. If there are no other items to discuss before this board, we call the meeting adjourned at 5:17 p.m. Thank you very much for your attendance.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.